we're always going to be confronted with these types of situations in the workplace. And the way we respond is the most important part of advancement and career success, in my opinion.
Welcome to the Game of Your Own podcast, your go-to place for empowering behind-the-scenes stories of trailblazing women who work in the sports and event industry. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake, and I'm honored to bring you this free resource where you'll hear firsthand accounts of how these incredible women got their seat at the table. And I will personally share strategies to help develop your leadership skills in this industry. We've got a lot to explore together. I am so glad you're here. All right, Game of Your Own listeners, let's do this.
All right, before we jump in, I want to remind you, Game of Your Own listeners, that this episode is about toxic work environments. The goal of this toxic work environment series is not to expose, but to educate, inspire, and support. So as a result, I will not reveal who the guest is, and the guest will not use the names of organizations or people that they have worked with. They will simply share their journey of lighting the way for others in similar situations. With that said, I'm excited to welcome our guest, my friend. Welcome to the Game of Your Own podcast. I'm glad you're here to share your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Okay, so I did a little homework, and as I understand it, you are a sports executive and have 15 years of professional experience. Did I get that right?
Yes, you've got that right.
Let's just dive right in. We have a lot to talk about. I would love for you to describe some of the factors that contributed to the toxicity of your work environment.
Well, I think over the years, I've seen quite a few different things. So early on in my career, I had managers who yelled. I even once had a manager or an employer whose checks wouldn't clear unless I went to the bank to cash it before the close of business. You know, I was younger then. I was in my 20s. And after that, I moved on to managers who did the typical things I think most of us have seen, which is trying to blame me for their mistakes or, you know, just speaking poorly about me behind my back. I think most of us have been in an environment where at some point we figured out that someone was saying something negative about us. I'm an experienced executive, and I even later in my career, I had a manager to tell me to chase down some signatures because his assistant didn't know how to do it. And so it's those kinds of things where there's a lack of professionalism. There is behavior that is overtly hostile. And then there are the passive aggressive things like do something that an assistant would do and not respecting your role within the organization. So those are the kinds of things that I've learned over time are red flags for me in terms of what kind of environment I'm working in and the potential for it to be even more toxic.
Say more about asking you as an executive to do things that an assistant would do.
We get to a certain point in our careers where we're more involved with strategy discussions and having interactions with more senior level executives. I think sometimes there are managers. We all are tasked with doing things that people think, oh, you know, maybe that's not within my pay grade. But look, I go to the copy machine. I used to go to the fax machine. I pick up my own mail. I answer my own phone. But then there are certain tasks that senior executives just don't do. And you know, I remember when I started off as an assistant and I was asked to get coffee quite a bit. And I had a conversation with a manager. I wasn't even an executive at this time. But what I said to her is, when you ask me to get coffee for you, I'm spending 20 to 25 minutes a day just getting coffee. But I was hired to be a contributor to the team in a way that moves the business forward. And I don't feel like a contributor when I'm going to get coffee and I spend 20 to 25 minutes doing that. And then I fall behind on all of the legitimate work that you want me to do. And that conversation with her gave me the confidence to be a little more conscious of the types of things people ask me later in my career. The way that executive accepted that conversation and was mindful of it and was respectful of it and was understanding of it made me as an assistant feel valued. And it made me understand the importance of making everyone on the team feel valued. But it also gave me insight into what are the things that people do to devalue people who are underrepresented in the workplace.
what I'm hearing you say is speaking up and setting boundaries gave you the confidence to continue to do that and not let people or not let managers, your bosses, devalue the work you were bringing to the table. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I did that when I was an assistant, but what I've learned over time is that we're always going to be confronted with these types of situations in the workplace. And the way we respond is the most important part of advancement and career success, in my opinion. So, to give you another story, I had a situation where I was going to graduate school, and I had a conversation with my manager, who was the head of the department at the time, letting that person know that I was starting graduate school, so my work hours would be a little bit more strict. I wouldn't be able to work as much overtime. And what the head of the department said to me was, well, even if you're going to grad school, I would never hire you because I only hire people who go to top grad schools and who work at these top industry firms. That wasn't even what the conversation was about. The conversation was supposed to be about my schedule, and the department head turned it into something different. It was hurtful. My soul was wounded because I had so much respect for this person. And I was in the dumps about it for several weeks. And then one day I decided, I was like, why am I in the dumps? I'm in the dumps because I'm sad. I'm hurt. And so every day I would go to the office, I would go into my office, close the door, and the first 5 to 10 minutes I would cry. And then I would get down to work, get down to business. So that happened for several weeks. It took 4 years, actually maybe 5 years, before that department head and I actually had a conversation about that. Because what I've learned is you don't want to have a conversation about those types of things. You don't want to have that conversation in the moment. It can be perceived as you being confrontational. And so even though the department head had told me 5 years prior that they would never hire someone like me, I actually did end up getting hired at that organization. And the department head wanted to go for a walk to congratulate me. And it was because it was a walk to discuss how happy this person was that I was able to achieve a goal. I felt like that was a safe place to share how that interaction 5 years prior had affected me. And the department head was very remorseful, teared up a little bit, and had absolutely no idea how they'd come across. And so what I've learned from those kinds of experiences is that you don't necessarily have to defend yourself in the moment. You can wait until the time is safe and still share how you feel and maintain the relationship.
Do you feel it's difficult to not say something in the moment? Like if you had to do it all over again, would you still not say anything and kind of just wait it out?
I would still not say anything. Mm-hmm. And it is difficult not to say anything in the moment because I think the initial reaction, the way we grow up typically sometimes, and sometimes this is a cultural thing, you want to defend yourself.
Yeah.
But that's a behavior that I've had to try to unlearn, but the compulsion to react in the moment is still there.
Mm.
I just learned to temper that.
Yeah. Gosh, that had to be so hard to take that on. And like you said, you started each day, like you were sad, but like you still showed up, had your moment of, coping, and then went on about your day.
A lot of that is maintaining professionalism. It's not giving someone an excuse to treat you poorly, because sometimes I think when we're being treated poorly in the workplace, when someone is creating a toxic environment, most of the times, I don't think that has anything to do with the person who's on the receiving end of the toxic or the hostile behavior. A lot of that has to do with the insecurity of the person that you're dealing with, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a manager, whether it's, someone else in your chain of command. It really has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with them. And what they have going on in their personal lives, or the struggles that they're having at work, or the insecurities that they have about their positions, because we're in an industry that's extremely competitive, and some people just don't know how to deal with the stress of that. And so they act out in very inappropriate, unprofessional ways. And we use terms like inappropriate, we use terms like unprofessional, even when people are yelling. Even when people are actively trying to undermine your career, we refer to it as unprofessional. But the truth of the matter is that those environments are toxic. Those environments are hostile. They can be emotionally unsafe, but it's what can we do to navigate around the situation and not allow that to affect our ability to come to work every day and do our best.
Yes. As you say it, I started thinking of when I was in a situation that was just all of a sudden became toxic. There's like a reorg and it was ugly. And a former boss told me to lay low. And I didn't understand at the time. No, I need to fight. I need to do this. And it was more about lay low, protect yourself. This has nothing to do with you and everything, like you just said, everything to do with those leaders and how they're feeling and what they're going through. And so right now is the time to protect yourself. And he, that advice ended up being great advice. It was very difficult for me to just kind of sit back for a minute, or it was for years, sit back for years until I figured out what I could do next and continuing, because I am not in a place where I cannot get a paycheck, right? So I had to continue to receive a paycheck. That was the priority when it started to boil down. And what you're saying reminds me of, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but a reel or a meme that I saw that said, I'm at the point in my career where if someone if an executive argues with me and tells me 2 + 2 is 5, I'm just going to tell them that they're right, because I don't have time to deal with them. It's like, oh, yeah.
There's nothing productive that's going to come of sticking up for yourself in the moment. And reorgs are the absolute hardest because, we're in an industry where people are not necessarily taught how to be good managers. They just stumble into an executive position and they've gotten away with certain types of behaviors their entire careers. No one's ever called them on it. And so we're expected to just go along to get along. And a lot of times it's not even about going along to getting along, it's managing your career. And so sometimes people say, oh, you're brown nosing. And so, you're just trying to get in with the boss. I don't even consider what people traditionally consider brown nosing. I don't even consider that brown nosing or kissing up. I also consider that part of managing your career. Like you said, it's about making decisions about how to keep yourself safe until you can find your next role at a different organization and hopefully get a fresh start.
Hey, Game of Thrones listeners, Jahaan popping in here. Do you ever feel overlooked at work, or perhaps unsure how to advocate for yourself? You are not alone, and it's exactly why I've created a free training called Empower Your Career, Mastering the Art of Self-Advocacy for Promotion and Raises. In this training, I will teach you tactics like how to have meaningful interactions with your leadership team, how to increase your confidence, and there's so much more. You'll walk away with the tools to confidently seize control of your career growth. So what do you think? Are you ready to stop being overlooked and start being noticed? If you are, the link to sign up is in the show notes. Let's elevate your career together. All right, let's get back to the episode.
When you finally get that fresh start, how do you recover, or how did you recover from the past wounds? Because those stay with you. And I've talked to a lot of clients and potential clients who just still had these open scars, if you will, open wounds, if you will, and, would be brought to tears about how they were treated 3 or 4 years ago. And it's hard to let go of. And it's really done damage to who they are. So do you have any advice? Maybe it's how you coped or how you recommend other people cope?
Well, I'll say this. When I am in a toxic work environment, there is no part of my person that believes that the problem is with me. I listen, I observe, and I come to a realization that someone, whoever that person is under stress in some way, whether that's at home or whether that's at work. What I tell myself is, I'm too good for this. I wasn't put on this earth to deal with this kind of negativity, toxicity. So when I've gone from role to role, I never go into a new role thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that happened to me. I'm still scarred. I go into my new role saying, I was too good for that. I am good at what I do. I'm experienced. I like working with people. I like problem solving, and I'm going to succeed. So to me, it's about how we feel about ourselves, whether or not we value what we bring to the table in a toxic work environment. We are very competent people. We are competent women, no matter what level we're in our careers. We do not deserve to be mistreated in any way, shape, or form. And so when we leave a toxic environment, that's a blessing. And to find something new, also a blessing. But finding something new is about recognizing also that the reason why you found a new job is because what you have to bring to the table is so important. And you might go to a new job and find toxic people there as well. The question is, are you able to navigate that, improve on what you learned from the previous position, reevaluate what are the skills that I was hired for? We're good at it. We're good at what we do, and we don't deserve it. And so I think that's part of the mentality when you go from company to company, from role to role. Always keep in mind, you are too good for whatever the drama is that someone's bringing to you. You are capable and you are a good employee. I think that is the right mentality to take into any new role.
I admire your, I'm going to call it like self-love, self-confidence, your strength. Where does that come from? Where does that, and I ask that because if someone's listening, they're like, yes, that's how I need to think. And that's how I need to approach it. She's absolutely right? Like that's what everyone's going to think. But sometimes, and then you leave and you go to do it and you get knocked down. It's just like, oh man, maybe I'm not as good as that person I listened to on the podcast. She was able to do that much better than I did. So where does that come from? Where does that strength come from?
It comes from experience. It comes from talking to people. Every once in a while, you're going to talk to someone who says, you're so good at this. Every once in a while, you're going to work with someone who says, you know what, I really appreciate you working late. And so I can say that over the years of my career, notwithstanding certain toxic individuals that I've worked with, I have worked with some very smart executives who've taught me a lot, about strategy and navigating politics, because that's basically when you're talking about a toxic work environment, what you're talking about is company politics. And what's interesting is, in sports and entertainment, a lot of these companies are very small. You've got a lot of executives who've never worked anywhere else except for within the sports or entertainment organization. And so you may not necessarily have an opportunity to build those relationships within the organization where someone can support you or mentor you or sponsor you. And I've luckily been able to have I've even had a manager who I felt like didn't trust me tell me when I was leaving the organization, I took a look at some things that you worked on. You were the only one who executed the way I specifically asked these things to be executed. And I just want to thank you for being so diligent. Those are the kinds of things that over time have built my confidence. Those are the kinds of things that I tell people when they ask me, like, how do I get into entertainment? Like, how do I work for a studio? I want to figure out how to navigate my career. And what I say to people is, be mindful of the ability to network. And network is not just about calling someone on the phone and saying, will you mentor me? Networking is about finding people that you have something in common with, something that you can connect with, and maintaining that relationship and being able to talk to them about good things and bad things and having it be a two-way relationship, and figuring out what you can do to help them in the future. But one of the things that you'll find when you focus on building good relationships, positive relationships, is that you'll start to see that people will tell you this is what you're good at. And that helps to build confidence. And I always just keep in mind, I started off at the bottom. I was an assistant. I used to go and grab someone's pizza for lunch. I used to help someone clean their desk. I would take this is old school, I would take their car to the car wash. And so what I've learned over time is how important the relationships are. And that is what I think gives me confidence, is knowing that there's a way I want people to be treated. And so I expect that same kind of treatment in return.
What do you think, because it is about politics, right? And it's internal, especially when there's a reorg. Like there's just a lot of toxic work environments are just about the culture and just about the leadership. And like you said, have little to do with you. And you let that go and you move on. There's two things here. Let me start with this one. What do you think organizations can do to prevent these sort of environments in the first place?
I think it comes from the top. I think an organization needs to have leadership that doesn't tolerate abusive behavior. And the way you exhibit that you understand as a leader that there are blind spots that teams may have in terms of the way they treat colleagues and direct reports is to communicate that to senior leadership. At the top of the chain in the C-suite, there needs to be an understanding of what the work environment is supposed to be. And then that needs to be cascaded down to employees, down to the coordinators and assistants and the drivers and whomever else, is that there is a certain environment that is expected. It should be comfortable for everyone. I think there should be lots of trainings. I think that trainings about bias should be every 6 months. I think trainings about hostile work environments should be every 6 months. I think that it should constantly be in employees and executives' faces that there is zero tolerance for hostile behaviors, no yelling, no inappropriate emails. Those are things that need to be communicated from the top. And when it's not, that's when you see the negativity start to seep in. And I think each of us can do a part by even, as senior level executives, kind of pointing it out to a colleague. If you see it happening, hey, you know what? I saw you got frustrated and you were yelling at your employee. I just want you to be mindful that that's the kind of thing that, I know you're frustrated. If you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. But it's the kind of thing I want you to be mindful of, because I think over time, it may affect your team. Those are the kinds of things I think that we can do when we see it.
Have you seen it done well at other organizations? Like, have you worked at organizations where senior leaders will jump in and make sure, I don't know, someone's yelling, like you said, and they will put an end to that, or, hold someone accountable for their behaviors, I think is where I'm trying to get to. Do you see, or have you seen organizations do this the right way?
There are organizations that I've seen do this the right way, but it depends on the department and it depends on the executive. So it's not consistent across the board. So the results for one person may not be the results for another. So I've seen a situation where someone was being verbally abused and that person decided not to say anything about the verbal abuse because they were afraid that they could potentially lose their jobs in retaliation. The person who brought it to the attention of the Human Resources Department was a colleague who observed the verbal abuse. That's what started the investigation, and that's what led to the disciplinary action against the manager. But that would not have necessarily happened for someone else. So in that particular instance, yes, the process worked the way the process is supposed to work. But I've also been in situations where the outcome is telling the person who was abused that it's not really abusive behavior, it's just unprofessional behavior. So there are certain things that sometimes are said to downplay it. But yes, I have seen situations where the process worked the way the process is supposed to work.
As we wrap up a little bit here, or not a little bit, as we wrap up here, I'm hearing things like self-love, self-confidence, believing in the value that you bring to the table. One theme I noticed about you is that you remember all the compliments and accolades that you have received from your colleagues. So it's something that you keep top of mind instead of the negative things that you hear from people. You believe it's not about you. You don't take this stuff personally. It's nothing to do with you. And the last one I would say is networking and building sort of your board and building sort of a having people that have different perspectives and that can help and support you. Is there anything else, as we wrap up, that maybe you want to share? Maybe I haven't asked you the right question.
There is one thing I want to share. I am not a self-help type of person, but there is a book called Survival of the Savvy, High Integrity Political Tactics for Career and Company Success. And the gentleman who wrote that book came to one of my organizations as we were going through a transition of being acquired and explained to us how it is that we need to reposition our mindset in the face of being acquired, meeting new people, and transitioning into a new work environment. The way he directed our attention to what we need to do to manage our careers is, I think, what helped me embrace the fact that even in a toxic work environment, I have learned so much. I have learned a lot from a lot of smart people. And that is what gives me confidence. I look at what they've taught me over time, how they've taught me to negotiate, how they've taught me to appreciate other departments and what they bring to the table, how they've taught me to go to other departments and sit and listen and train with them on how they do their job so that I know how to do my job better. Those are the kinds of things that have helped me have a more positive outlook. And there's something about that book, Survival of the Savvy, High Integrity Political Tactics for Career and Company Success. There's something about understanding how organizations work and how to navigate people who are very highly political. I think that's what's helped. Now, that's not to say that there aren't times where I feel bad. That's not to say that there aren't times where out of frustration, I'll just pack up all of my things and go home. And on the ride home, I shed a few tears. But it's about how do you pick yourself up? How do you say to yourself, it's not about you? And I think once we change our mindset about these types of environments and the people that we're working with, and knowing that maybe you can I've outlasted quite a few bad bosses. That's also a strategy, is keeping yourself safe so that you can outlast. And your other alternative strategy is getting out the first chance you get. And so that's the reason why, what I try to tell people that I mentor is focus on doing the work and focus on keeping yourself safe, but always maintain your professionalism and don't let the bad things that are happening around you affect who you are.
Amen. I feel like this was like a master class in strategies to survive, thrive in toxic work environments. This has been incredible. Thank you for sharing your story. I know for certain this will help other women or men who are facing similar struggles. So thank you very much.
I was very happy to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Game of Round listeners, if you have been in a similar situation and want to share your story, I want to hear from you. Please reach out. Simply email me at jblake@jahanblake.com. Your story could help ensure that no woman feels like she has to suffer alone while working in a toxic work environment. Until next week, my friends.